morning. Today's scripture lesson is taken from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. As we work together with him, we urge you also not to accept the grace of God in vain. For he says, "At an acceptable time I have listened to you, and on a day of salvation I have helped you. See, now it is the acceptable time. See, now is the day of salvation. We are putting no obstacle in anyone's way, so that no fault may be found with our ministry. But as servants of God, we have commended ourselves in every way, through great endurance, in afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger, by purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirit, genuine love, truthful speech, and the power of God, with the weapons of righteousness for the right hand, and for the left, in honor and dishonor, in ill repute and good repute. We are treated as impostors, and yet are true, as unknown and yet as are well known, as dying and see we are alive, as punished and yet not killed, as sorrowful yet always rejoicing, as poor yet making many rich, as having nothing and yet possessing everything. We have spoken frankly to you, Corinthians. Our heart is wide open to you. There is no restriction in our affections, but only in yours. In return, I speak as to children. Open wide your hearts also. My message this morning is titled, Genuine Expressions of Love. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my soul be always acceptable to you, O Lord, for you are my strength and my Redeemer. A man at work decided to show his wife how much he loved her. Before going home, he showered, shaved, and put on some choice cologne and bought her a bouquet of flowers. He went to the front door and knocked. His wife answered the door and exclaimed, "Oh no, this has been a terrible day. First I had to take Billy to the emergency room and get stitches in his leg. Then your mother called and said she's coming to visit for 2 weeks. Then the washing machine broke. And now this. You come home drunk." Genuine expressions of love. At least that husband tried. Another man came home from work one day very tired, but his eyes lit up as he stepped inside his house. He saw a beautiful cake with 7 candles that was sitting on the kitchen table. He exclaimed, "A birthday cake. Whose birthday is it?" "Oh," his wife said nonchalantly, "the cake is for the dress I'm wearing. It's 7 years old today." Genuine expressions of love. Genuine expressions of love could be lots of things. Material gifts, sure, but much more. A number of years ago, back in 1986, U.S. Senator Jake Garn of Utah did something that most of us would admire. He donated one of his organs to save a life. A survey said 64% of Americans approve of organ donation, but only about 49% actually sign donor cards and make arrangements for the donation of organs. In Senator Garn's case, however, he did not wait until his death to donate his kidney. His 27-year-old daughter, Susan Garn Horn, suffered from progressive kidney failure due to diabetes. Jake Garn and his 2 sons were all found to be compatible donors. The senator insisted that he should be the one to give the kidney. Garn said, "Her mother carried her for 9 months, and I'm honored to give her a part of me. So on September 10th, 1986, in a Washington hospital, a 6-hour surgery was performed to remove one of his kidneys and implant it into his daughter. Both were fine after the surgery. The doctor reported after the surgery, "The senator is awake and has a bit of a grin on his face. He seems very satisfied, happy, and peaceful." Talk about a genuine expression of love. You can't get much better than that. From our text in 2 Corinthians 6, I would like for us to consider some genuine expressions of love. First, avoid being offensive. A college professor said to his students, "If there are any dumbbells in the room, please stand up." There was a pause, and a lone freshman stood up in the back of the room. The professor said, "What? Do you consider yourself a dumbbell?" The student replied, "Well, not exactly, but I hate to see you standing there all alone." Calling someone a dumbbell or a dummy would be offensive. Watch your words. Don't be offensive with your words, because you may have to eat them at some point. Don't be confrontational. Not only will you offend people, but you will also end up picking on someone who is bigger than you someday. In 2 Corinthians 6, verse 3, we read, "We put no stumbling block in anyone's path, so that our ministry will not be discredited." The Living Bible reads, "We try to live in such a way that no one will ever be offended or kept back from finding the Lord by the way we act." The Apostle Paul did not have an attitude or need an attitude adjustment. He did not think or act, "Well, I'm going to do as I please. I'm going to do and say what I want, no matter what others may think." That's the attitude that some people have. They don't care who they hurt or how they hurt others. Whenever we go around cutting people down verbally, we are not loving them. We are being offensive. Love does not purposely offend others. Avoid being offensive to others. Watch your mouth. Watch your words. Watch what you say and how you say it. Proverbs 10:19 says, "When words are many, sin is not absent, but he who holds his tongue is wise." Watch your steps as well. We offend with our words and with our actions. Romans 14:13 says, "Therefore let us stop passing judgment on one another. Instead, make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle in your brother's way." Paul didn't want to be offensive. He was willing to give things up in his life if he considered them to be a stumbling block to others. The principle is this: if we love people genuinely, we'll eliminate things in our lives that might keep them from following Christ. An illustration of this is when a young couple gets married, it doesn't take long before they find out things about each other that are offensive and obstacles to their love, such as don't talk with your mouth full, don't pick at your toenails, quit digging at your nose, stop throwing your dirty underwear on the floor. There's probably something the wife does too, but I can't think of any. If we love our mate, we will avoid being offensive and avoid doing offensive things that harm the marriage relationship. As the old saying goes, a happy wife makes a happy life. But I've heard a newer version that goes, a happy spouse makes a happy house. Same thing applies to the church. If we want to encourage one another in the faith, there may be times when we should stop doing certain things that are a stumbling block to others, things that offend. I heard about a young Christian man who had a lot of charisma, especially when it came to influencing young people. He wanted to be a youth sponsor at his church. One day at a ball game, he was carrying his cup of beer up the steps, and he ran into a couple of junior high kids from the church. They stopped and talked and laughed, and he could tell that they looked up to him. As he sat down in his seat with his beer in hand, he thought to himself, it would be awful if tonight those young people decided to go drink beer because of me and get into trouble over it or have an accident. And that was the last beer that young man ever drank. He stopped drinking beer out of love for those young people. Love avoids being offensive. Secondly, attend to others. 2 Corinthians 6:6, Paul speaks of understanding, patience, and kindness. And when we are understanding, patient, and kind, we are generally thoughtful of other people. It's sad to say, we live in a very self-centered society. A Sunday school teacher, after reading the story of the Good Samaritan, asked her class what they had learned. One little boy piped up and said, I've learned that whenever I get into trouble, someone should help me out. Most of us look out for number one. Another example. Late in his life, Sir Winston Churchill took a cruise on an Italian ship. A journalist from a Rome newspaper encountered the former Prime Minister to ask him why he chose to travel on an Italian line when the stately Queen's line under the British flag was available. Churchill gave the question his consideration and then replied, there are three things I like about Italian ships. First, their cuisine, which is unsurpassed. Second, their service, which is quite superb. And then Sir Winston added, and then there's none of this nonsense about women and children first. Basically, we are selfish, self-centered, thinking of ourselves before we think of others. But it should not be this way. Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, it says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Romans 15, verses 1 through 3 says, we who are strong ought to bear the failings of the weak and not please ourselves. Each of us should please his neighbor for his good. So build him up. For even Christ did not please himself, but, as it is written, the insults of those who insult you have fallen on me. In Galatians 5:13, it says, you, my brothers, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love. Galatians 6:2 says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. example of this. Bob Russell was a senior minister of the large Southeast Christian Church of Louisville, Kentucky. One weekend, they had over 22,053 people come to 3 services and attending their church. Their general fund offering was $608,000, $600,704. Another $27,000 was given to the building fund. You would think that the senior minister of such a large church should deserve some distinction and respect wherever he goes, right? Not necessarily. Bob tells this story about his parents, who were raised differently from many people today. Bob said, "Recently my sister asked us to a family get-together at her house in Cincinnati. They were in a new house, so she gave directions. She said there was room for only 2 cars in their driveway, and we couldn't park on the street. If the driveway was full when we arrived, we were to drive half a block down the street and park at the schoolyard and just walk back to the house. When my family and I arrived, there were no cars in the driveway, so I pulled in. When we went inside, we discovered my parents were already there. They had parked down at the schoolyard and walked so that those who came later wouldn't have to walk that far. So I went back out and moved my car down to the schoolyard and walked back." Bob was humbled by his humble parents. What a lesson for all of us today. That's the kind of thoughtfulness we should have for others. Love attends to others. Love is always thinking of others. Then we should speak your love. Early on in their marriage, a certain husband told his wife that he loved her. Years passed, like 30 years, and he never again told her that he loved her. Finally, one day she asked him about this. He replied, "Well, look, I told you a long time ago that I loved you, and that if I ever changed my mind, I would tell you." In 2 Corinthians 6, verse 11, "We have spoken freely to you." I think we can assume that in Paul's free speech, he was quick to express his love for people. He wasn't too fearful or proud to say, "You mean a lot to me. I care about you. I love you. I am here for you." In Ecclesiastes 3, verse 7, it says, "There is a time to be silent and a time to speak." Proverbs 10:21 says, "The lips of the righteous nourish many." Are you nourishing people with your lips, with your speaking? Proverbs 12:18 says, "The tongue of the wise brings healing." Are you bringing about healing with your words? Proverbs 13:12, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick." I remember a story that a priest I had many years ago told. He assisted in a wedding that took place in the Nazarene church in town. This young couple was going on to attend our church, but she said previously gone to the Nazarene church and wanted to be married there. In fact, she and her family invited the former preacher to come back and perform her wedding, and our priest assisted him. Before the wedding started, the Nazarene preacher and the father of the bride and the priest were in the back room waiting. Suddenly, just before they walked out, the Nazarene preacher said to the father of the bride, whom he had apparently known for many years. "I love you, Robert." And Robert said, "I love you too." That took our priest back. He had never heard a man in church tell another man, "I love you," and mean it in a non-romantic way. But it was very good. A genuine expression of love is expressing your love vocally. In conclusion, in his book, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis wrote, "Do not waste your time bothering whether you love your neighbor, but rather act as if you did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. And when you are behaving as you love someone, you will presently come to love him." Lewis is saying that we learn to love by practicing love. We're all amateurs when it comes to love, but this doesn't mean that we should stop demonstrating love. Practice makes perfect. Practicing love makes us all better at loving. Colossians 3:14 says, "And over all these virtues, put on love." 1 Peter 4:8 says, "Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins." Loving one another is the greatest thing we can do in life. Don't be offensive. Attend to others. Speak your love. Demonstrate your love. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Amen.